I first heard of the Rose and Camellia collection not very long ago, just a few weeks back at PAX East in fact, where I got a hands-on demo at the Way Forward booth. As Old Gamer Joe and Silent Signs will certainly attest to, I was a little bit skeptical of playing this bizarre-looking anime game. Nothing against anime, we're just more like friendly acquaintances than besties with testes, so to speak. Well, it's best not to judge a game by its cover, because barely 2 minutes passed before I was laughing like a hyena, frantically swinging my Joy-Con around to slap my way up the nobility totem pole of the Tsubaki Koji family. That sentence made absolutely no sense to you, but it totally will later, I promise. What does make sense is taking a quick moment to shout out our Patreon, where you can join us as a member and get a variety of awesome perks like free games depending on your membership tier, access to our community Discord, an exclusive podcast, and of course that warm and fuzzy feeling you'll get knowing that you're supporting honest, independent coverage of the latest and greatest that the indie gaming scene has to offer. With that out of the way, let's talk about what the Rose and Camellia collection is for those already confused at what they're looking at.
You are going to learn how to slap and become a proper noble lady for the Tsubaki Koji family.
Beginning its humble origins as a series of Flash titles, the Rose and Camellia collection is actually a Nintendo Switch exclusive remaster of sorts with some extra content added for good measure. What's here is a unique hybrid of visual novel segments and turn-based slap fighting. The Rose and Camellia collection exists in a world of aristocratic noblewomen whose preferred method of conflict resolution is slapping the shit out of each other until their faces are quite literally bruised and bleeding. If this sounds like the dumbest thing you've ever heard, well, you're right, but let me also assure you that the game is very much in on the joke. While visual novels aren't quite my jam, the short story sequences preceding each battle were honestly just as good as the slap fights themselves. Each game included in the collection is its own story from the perspective of a character either in or involved with the Tsubaki Koji family, be it the story of Reiko slapping her way to become the family's matriarch, the story of a young maid slapping her way around the world to prove she's worthy to serve the Tsubaki Koji family, or my personal favorite, the story of Saori, a rich brat who refuses to accept a quote-unquote common woman becoming head of the family and slaps her way to retrieve the title for herself. The absurdity of it all certainly doesn't end with the concept itself, as these story sequences are peppered with hilariously melodramatic lines like, "All I want is to just live lavishly without doing anything," or "This is the power of a common woman." I really don't think I do the delivery justice, but I tried.
I will take on the mission instead of her!
Progression through each scenario of the game ratcheted up the absurdity to indescribable levels, to the point where I was getting into a slap fight with a former ballerina turned newspaper solicitor, who before challenging me to battle shouted, "You cannot escape from me and my newspaper!" I don't want to spoil any more lines, there are a lot of them that I truly adored, but my point is, don't go into the Rose and Camellia collection expecting it to take itself seriously at all. This is a stupid game made by people who very much intended to make a stupid game, and succeeded tremendously, with everything from the voice acting to the ridiculous animations of your swollen, bloodied up rivals being the perfect complement to its slap-happy antics. But let's get to the actual slapping, which is, of course, the meat of the game. And there's no better place to start than the controls, because I must be clear that this is not a game that should be played while chilling on the couch. There are two control schemes here. The first is the intended control scheme, which is for you to use the Joy-Con's motion controls to get into very physical slap fights that made my arms so tired that enough time playing would require me to answer some really awkward questions about why my right arm is so much stronger than my left. I say this is the intended control scheme because comparing it to its touchscreen swiping alternative is kind of like comparing freshly made sushi at a chef's table in Japan to grocery store sushi that was dropped on the floor a few hours ago. I had a ton of fun physically swinging my Joy-Con around to slap my enemies to pieces, and almost no fun at all using the handheld touchscreen controls whose lack of responsiveness makes slap fighting a difficult and miserable chore. So while the lack of feasible accessibility options here is unfortunate, it's also important to note that if you're not planning to physically swing your arm around while playing and take the potential arm pain that comes with it, you may not have a very good time at all. The actual mechanics of slap fighting are simple. When it's your turn, you'll hold the A button and swing your arm to slap your opponent. Now, admittedly, there's a timing element of this that even after playing through the game I never quite got to grips with. A timer at the top left of the screen will trickle down from the beginning to end of your turn, giving a fairly lengthy opportunity to time your slap. Depending, presumably, when you slap and how you slap, you'll either land a hard dramatic smack, a light cheek tap, or miss entirely and risk getting counterslapped. There's a bit more to this than just swinging your hand over, as later scenarios will teach you about feigning a slap, counter-slapping, and double slapping. These elements added some complexity to the combat, but sadly some inconsistency as well. The double slap maneuver, for example, felt almost impossible to pull off, with me actively managing it only twice during the course of combat, and failing tremendously every other time. I'll fully admit that this could be down to user error, and there may be some nuance in the brief tutorials that I didn't quite grasp, but in my opinion, the fighting worked best when it was at its simplest. That said, while your turn to slap is important, your opponent's turn is arguably more so. They'll raise their hand to ready a slap, sometimes trying to fake you out to mess you up, and you'll have to hold the controller's back bumper and fling it to the side in order to dodge accordingly at the exact moment the slap comes. Do so successfully, and you can land a hefty counter slap that, when followed up with another successful turn, can certainly turn the tide of some battles. The opponent phase isn't without its own issues though. While I enjoyed having to learn each opponent's moveset and timing as if this is a really strange take on Sekiro, or Slapkiro if you will, though understandable if you won't, some battles presented seriously challenging difficulty spikes where the multiple times that I lost didn't always feel like my fault. Sometimes the margin for error felt so minuscule that correctly timing a dodge felt more up to luck than skill, and the 2 or 3 battles that suffered from this certainly threatened to derail my otherwise good time. And unfortunately, while this game does have an option called Equal Health Mode, which I would have thought would balance the scales for the tricky opponents who have much more health than you do, it seemed to only apply to the game's versus mode, thus demanding its single-player difficulty spikes to be endured until they were done. I can't pretend I didn't have fun in the game's versus mode, because I certainly did, especially with the wide cast of characters available for each of the 2 players to choose from. But getting into a virtual slap fight with your friend is pretty much exactly how it sounds. Funny for a little bit, but ultimately feeling too shallow and random to really become a game night staple. This is a game that I'll certainly be showing people for some time to come, but only for the 5 to 10 minutes it takes before we're inevitably ready to move on. Presentation-wise, this collection does just about everything right. As I mentioned before, the voice acting is excellent in a very intentionally awful way, which I swear will make sense when you actually play it. Each character hams up their role so well that I was laughing with them the entire time. Frankly, I don't think there was a dud in the bunch, even if Saori's ridiculous screeching about how much she hates common women was by far the standout of the bunch. The artwork is also fantastic, with the variety of ways each character gets visually pulverized during battle being, uniquely well done. It's pretty disturbing how much effort went into making each character look appropriately bloodied up as they got the snot slapped out of them, but at the same time, impossible not to recognize the effort involved, for better or worse. There is one thing I've neglected to mention up to this point though, which is that if you're unfamiliar with the Rose and Camellia collection as I was, the way it's advertised as a collection of 5 games, while not insincere, could give you the wrong idea about how much content is here. Each game took me only about 15 to 30 minutes to get through while watching all the cutscenes and occasionally having to retry battles several times. Add that all up, and you're really only in for a couple hours of slapping here, plus whatever value you get out of the versus mode. And while I feel like the game is unique enough to still warrant its $20 price tag despite the short length, those looking for significant value in their purchases may be disappointed at how short each entry is. Overall though, I can safely say as the understatement of the century that I've never played a game like this before and feel fairly certain I never will again. The Rose and Camellia collection is presented with such a dark, hilarious, and disturbing purity of purpose that I'm tempted to say it completely succeeded in what it tried to do. But, realistically speaking, between the short length, occasionally troublesome controls, and handful of difficulty spikes, while this is a game absolutely worth playing for those seeking its unique brand of dark humor, some frustrations exist that prevent it from reaching its maximum potential. Still, I can't pretend I didn't have a great time with it, and the amount of laugh-out-loud moments I got in its short runtime gave me plenty to remember it by. The Rose and Camellia collection gets the Bronze Genie Lamp of approval.